Pat, are you still a Flowmaster?
I still am, yeah.
Yeah.
Still
Okay.
master of the flow. Easily one of the funniest names I've heard, but I still am.
Awesome.
We have liftoff. We are live tonight with CrossFit OG legend Pat Barber. Pat, thanks for joining us. First and foremost, let everyone know where they can find you. Send them to your links. Let them know where we can direct them.
Oh, sure. You can find me on Instagram. I have two accounts. One's called Coach Pat Barber. It's my just main life account. And then I have a very fatherhood specific one called the Father's Guild. If you look that up, that's where you'll find me.
Sweet. So, Pat, I know a while back, this is probably like 2014, 2015. I don't know how I found it, but you had a PDF out there for icebreakers for coaches.
Yeah.
And I used to use that all the time. And so we want to start here with you. We're going to do a little word phrase name association with you. So we're going to
Okay.
throw a couple things out here just based on some of the research we've done with you on you and things
Sure.
we've learned about you from the year. So first one would be is Fran.
Short, I guess, is where my brain goes with that.
Okay, okay. Mike Bergner.
The man, like just icon. Yeah.
Team Rogue versus Team Again Faster.
Best memories ever. And just fantastic adventure.
Chris Spealler.
Nicest guy I know.
Okay. Flowmaster.
Weird name. Definitely strange name. Uh,
Okay, okay. Yeah, so now with our through line, we like to make a little through line with our guests and our kind of connection. Obviously, been following you for a very long time. Jimmy and I have both worked at CrossFit gyms around the country. We've done our level one and then that sort of stuff. But for me, even though coming up in the Jersey Shore, Jimmy and I are both from the Jersey Shore, and I think a lot of times nowadays when people hear the Jersey Shore, they think of Snooki and JWoww and those sorts of things, and that's really not what the Jersey Shore is like or what it entails. So for me, growing up, uh, in a somewhat of a surfing skateboard culture, for me, I always associated up until probably about 2008, associated Santa Cruz with the Screaming Hand. With the
yeah.
skateboards and surfing, and then the mountain bikes. So I'm curious, what was it like for you growing up in Santa Cruz? Were you a surfer? Were you a skater? Did you get into any of that culture? I know you were a volleyball athlete. So what was it like growing up in Santa Cruz?
Yeah, man. It was awesome. Honestly, I'm very thankful for where I got to spend my time growing up. The whole kind of Santa Cruz vibe is you can see in that old imagery around the screaming hand and all the old Santa Cruz gear, which I don't know if you've seen internationally. Santa Cruz is making a huge international push right now where they're massive in Australia, New Zealand, and stuff like that, which is funny because it's like it's my hometown. But it was amazing growing up in it. Yeah, I surfed, I skated. I loved all the baggy clothes and wearing my DC Shuko USA and like all the stuff. Like I skated growing up for years and spent a lot of time surfing from like 14 till about 19. And I actually stopped surfing right around the same time that I started doing CrossFit a little bit more. And then only recently in the last, I'd say 6 years, 7 years, I got back into surfing. But yeah, grew up doing all that. Was very, very fortunate to have that in my childhood and loved that entire scene for the most part, except for surfers. I'm not a big fan of surfers. Like that localized scene here in Santa Cruz is pretty aggressive. And I was like, you know what? I love this activity, but you guys are pretty lame, which is a weird one for me.
Yeah, we know what you're talking about there for sure. We have
Yeah.
again, people think of the Jersey Shore. They don't necessarily think about surfing or big waves, but we get some storms and we get some good surf there,
Yeah.
and there's a definite local flair to certain breaks and stuff like that. And it's that again, that was kind of a turn off for me too. And for me, it was also it sort of interfered with sports, at least in my parents' mind. So
Yeah.
they kind of steered me away from that. So I'm curious, you know, you have a unique CrossFit journey, whereas there are kids that come up in CrossFit now that have been doing it, CrossFit kids, CrossFit teens. But for you, I mean, you really were kind of the original CrossFit teen.
Yeah.
When did athletics come into that for you? And I know, your story, you had Nicole as a teacher, you had Tony as a teacher.
Yeah.
Um, when did sports come into it for you?
Sports was, from day one. My mom put me on a skateboard when I was 2. I've got old footage of that, and not footage, actually, photos of that, of me pushing around on my knee on a skate. But that's kind of how I've communicated with the world, is via physicality. I've never felt particularly comfortable in educational settings, and I never felt particularly comfortable in. I mean, I enjoyed social settings, but I never felt like I truly fit in. But on the sporting field was really how I connected with the world. So from a very young age, playing, skating, playing soccer, baseball, swimming, diving, like everything I could play, I've been doing from very, very young, and have always loved sports. That was my thing. So yeah, sports were actually one of the reasons I stopped skating, was because I was like, if I ever want to play anything other than skateboarding, I need to stop skating, because you end up injured so often. So it was definitely something, just like you said, I got steered away from doing that a little bit more full time. But yeah, sports have always, and athletics have always been a thing for me.
Cool.
Pat, another little through line here. We actually met back in the day. I was working at CrossFit Morristown, and we took a bunch of people up to Crash Bees, the rowing competition in Boston, and you were
Yeah.
up there. I think you were up there with Team Rogue, and I I I thought you were like the coolest because like Rich was asking me before we logged on here. Like, what do you think of when you think of like Pat Barber? I was like, well, back in the day, he always to me seemed like the dude who wasn't like Mr. Super CrossFit, but was like really good at it. You always, and I don't know if it's having that beach kid mentality or coming up in the beach. That's kind of like the mentality of things, but that was always what kind of like drew me to you, is that like, yeah, I'm gonna do this, but I'm not like Mr. Captain CrossFit.
Oh man, thank you. I remember that event. That was a fun event. I've only been to Crash Bees one time. So that was such a cool, in that big like stadium, and we were looking all down on everyone down below and just watching some of those horses get after the row. Yeah, that's cool. I was there with it again faster.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, as far as how I always approach CrossFit, like I only did it, like I hate working out, like being in gyms and stuff like that. And that whole culture was really a big turnoff for me. And coming up in the Santa Cruz culture, it was like, you have fun. Like that's what you like. It should be fun, and it should be a battle, and it should be a game. And so I always treated CrossFit as that. Especially when I was younger, like that's the only reason I did it, was because it seemed like a game to me. And I never understood gym culture. So I think a lot of people who found themselves in CrossFit were coming from gym culture. And that vibe was never something that I was like a part of. I still don't find myself fitting into it, especially these days when like now there's a full CrossFit culture, and they're like the epitome of it's like just a modified gym bro, you know? And I've always appreciated board shorts and skate shoes. I'm not like the only reason I've ever worn anything other than that is because it was given to me. And even then, I go through them as much as I can. And I still rock as many board shorts as I can. Like that to me is CrossFit gear, is a pair of board shorts and some tennis shoes, and that's it. Yeah.
Well, Rich and I always used to say I was doing CrossFit when it was Vans and board shorts.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. And to me, that's what it is. Like it's become such a spectacle these days of people being like, I need all my gear and my special shoes and my belt and my bag and my hat and my wrist wrap. And I'm like, dude, you need a pair of shorts and a website. Like that's what you need. You go to the website, it's free online, you get after it. But no, I love the fact that it grew the way it did. I love that it touched so many more people, but it's definitely it's become glamorized in a way that I don't think it needs to be.
How do
So,
you how
yeah,
do you navigate that as the flow master? Do you kind of poke fun at that a little bit? Like, I mean, because you're
Absolutely.
you're in it.
Absolutely. I mean, because like to me, I take the level one super seriously. And I think the content at the level one is one of the most beautifully succinct pieces of knowledge that exists out there. It's so poignant when you go take it and when it's delivered well, you're like, oh yeah, of course, that all makes sense. And like I forever understand that and why we would continue to do that. And back in the day, it was like you were meeting a lot of resistance because people had no concept for what CrossFit is. These days, people have some sense of it. So now my goal when I teach these level ones is to poke fun at what we've become to some degree. And say like it really is this, like the core methodology is very straightforward and very tangibly deep, like when you start to pick it apart. And so I always do that at the flows and stuff and like make fun of, hey, right now I've got to go any special knee sleeves on or special headbands. You got to take your power goo, go get it before the workout right now. And like I'll poke fun at it all weekend just because to me, those things you can do within CrossFit, of course, you can do whatever you want, but they're not what make CrossFit CrossFit. And I try to really hammer home the methodology being the thing that we put our heart behind and the definition of fitness and things like that. So yeah, I poke fun at it all the time just because it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah, Jimmy and I, we kind of came to it probably '07, '08, and it wasn't until 2010 that we actually did our level one. And we had never been in a CrossFit before we did our level one. It was always like in the garage, backyard, using
Yeah,
what we
hell
had,
yeah.
modifying things. And so we go to our level one and we're sitting in front of these two guys and they're talking about, he's like, yeah, it's kind of like a get rich quick scheme, but I'm drinking a gallon of milk a day and I think I'm going to add like X amount of pounds and my squat's gone up. And we were like, looked at each other like, what the fuck did we get ourselves into?
Dude, that was back in the days when that Go Mad diet,
Yeah.
gallon of milk a day came around, and everyone's like, because people were that was one of the big critiques of CrossFit back in the day is like you're just gonna lose all your size. So there was a bunch of bros who came into it who were trying not to lose all their size, so they were drinking a gallon of raw milk a day, and I was like, that's gonna wreak havoc on your toilet, man. Like it's so funny the things that have passed through the community, but I'm so stoked you guys got to have that experience in front of you. Where did you take your level one?
We were at CrossFit Reston and Joe Alexander was our Flowmaster.
Oh, nice. He's a good dude. It's
Yeah.
a solid man. A very funny, very solid man.
Yeah. It was him and Chris Smith and then
Nice.
Maggie
Tincture.
Tincher, yeah. And then uh Chris's wife was there too.
Oh yeah,
Um
Andrea.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
So Chris Smith, have you ever looked up his history and his background?
Oh yeah.
He's a badass.
Dude, that guy is like he's the smiliest, nicest dude. And you look up his history and his background, or you talk to other SEALs, you talk to other special ops guys, and they're like, no, no, no. Chris is gnarly. And like they put him on this pedestal when they talk about him. And I'm always like, whoa, okay. Because I've just known him as like this goofy Flowmaster CrossFit guy. Yeah, that's a good dude. That's a solid crew that you had there. Good for you.
Yeah, we had a solid crew and it was being our first time in the CrossFit gym, we were slightly intimidated. And I think there was a
Hmm.
guy there that he did like a 309 Fran and we were just
Cool.
like we're doing jumping pulls. We're like, oh my
I don't know how to do pull-ups. What's wrong with me?
because early on it was still we being athletes we had these delusions like oh we Chris we're smaller guys so Chris Spealler was like the guy that we looked up to and it's like if Chris can do it there's a glimmer of hope for us and then we got
Yeah.
it's like oh no I'm not ever going to be this strong.
Chris was such a badass. And I think those early days were so fun when you got people really doing CrossFit for the first time. Like even though they'd done it, they hadn't been in an environment where they really pushed and they really felt it. I mean, there are people who had like you probably had each other, so you'd probably push each other pretty well when you were training together. But a lot of people were literally like doing it at Globo gyms and they were just like, they were doing what they do. And then they came to that level one and they did that workout with all those people, with the coaches and the hype and all that stuff. And it was like you just watched their eyes go of like, oh my gosh, like this feels very different. And that was really cool back in the day. I think nowadays people feel that somewhat at most affiliates that they go to. So they have the sense of that like this is how you push. But back in the day, you got to give it to them for the relative first time, which was always a fun experience. I especially enjoyed it when I went to Australia to do that for people because those were some units who would hit a wall. You'd do Fran and they'd do the first round without breathing. And then they'd hit round two and just go, oh, like to the ground. And you're like, oh, it was some of the funnest.
I mean, nowadays is pretty much everyone that's at those seminars, especially the level one, bought in, because I know I spent some time with BMAC and the endurance crew doing some of their seminars, and you still had people that were coming there, seemed like they were more coming there to be combative, to challenge the methodology and stuff like that. I
Yeah.
imagine at this point in time, it's not like that at all.
Nah, not really. I mean, you get the probably one to maybe two people who are bringing any sort of combativeness. You'll get a lot of questions, and I love questions, but these days I revel in the opportunity to have a combative participant. Like if I can get a combative participant's mind changed and really bought into CrossFit, like that's the fun for me now. Like I beg for like the hard ones. Give me a hard person who's going to come and like battle me. But these days it doesn't happen that often. It's probably like I said, one per seminar who's maybe like, I heard this, and you're like, okay, well, let me tell you why that's not true, you know?
Yeah.
um, but it's funny because like when I was younger, like that would bother me. Like it would be like, I need to show you my, why we're better. But nowadays I revel in trying to see where they're coming from and really navigate that and show them the side of what we do that they would vibe with and be like, check it out. But these days, most people are to some degree bought in.
Yeah.
So, Pat, talking about the old days and the methodology being what kind of got you to buy in and what keeps you coming back. I know you got a 2001 CrossFit Odyssey going on, going back and doing all the old WODs from the beginning, and you inspired Rich. He started joining you, and he's been hopping on. So I'm curious how that's going and what are your takeaways on that?
Yeah, man. So I did about a month of that. And honestly, the hardest part was remembering to film it and do it all. I wouldn't say that's the hardest part. The hardest part was the workouts. Like Rich, you went back and you did those. Like they're brutal
Yeah.
and they were awesome. Like they were very, like you could see Greg tinkering with little things and like how he would write in his little areas. But like, I think what I really got from that was there was a lot more open-ended type workouts where like the potential for you to go either really far or really short was very high. And there was also a lot of open-endedness in the sense that sometimes he just give you an hour to chunk out a bunch of work. It's like get this whatever you can get done in an hour, and it's like that time frame doesn't work in an affiliate. Like we can't say let's run a class where from the start of the class to the end of the class you're just getting as many pull-ups as you can. Like that's the entire class, and that was one of those workouts. So I think there was back in those original days, I think there was a lot more workouts that found themselves a lot more open-ended. And I really appreciated the psychology of that because I think where we've come to in CrossFit programming is we've really maximized our programming for power output. And so you see a lot of short and intense stuff, or you see a lot of strength and metcon stuff, or you see a lot of like, couplets and triplets where there's really high power movements all slammed together, which, in reality is going to give results, but it loses some of the psychological drive that you get from something like do an hour's worth of pull-ups or did you do that first month, Rich? The 2001 February?
I actually did. I jumped back into 2002. I saw that you did 2001, and then I was like, let me dive in here in 2002 and see what we're working with here. And the one that really got me was it was either bench press and rope climbs or deadlifts and rope climbs. And we have ropes at the school, and I can like shoot up them without my hands, and the kids are all like, their minds are blown. And then I did that, and I did one set of the deadlifts or the bench press, and I went to get on the rope, and I forgot how to climb a rope, and I was like, oh my God, I gotta I gotta hit pause on this and relearn my wraps and stuff, because there's no way I'm not using my legs. And so
Yeah.
yeah, it was fun though. I enjoy it, and I like going back through. And the whole thing for me was like, oh, I can actually go back to the beginning and just follow these programs and
Yeah.
the main site. Like I'd never thought to do that before. Now that I have access to this amazing, basically it's a 5,000 square foot CrossFit gym. We've got
Right.
echo bikes, we've got ski ergs, we've got rowers, we've got 7 squat racks, we've got a rogue rig, we've got male, female
Right.
training bars. It's like, I mean, I say to the kids every day, I'm like, you don't realize how good you have it. I'm like, I've worked in CrossFit gyms from the East Coast to the West Coast and in between in Midwest, and this is one of the best facilities equipment wise that I've ever worked in.
Yeah, man. And you can get that affiliated for free, right? The with CrossFit will give a free affiliation to high schools and school and colleges, and so like if you ever wanted to, you can apply for it and you get a free affiliation.
Okay,
Um,
I'm on it.
which yeah, it'd be cool. But uh, yeah, I mean, I think they also have you, right? You're going to be coaching them through some of that stuff. And like,
Yeah.
that's how, can you imagine that? Can you imagine that if in high school you get like that facility and a coach like you? Like, everything would be better. Your whole mindset around fitness from much earlier on would have been better.
Oh
Like
yeah.
your mindset around hard things would have been better from early on. Like I got lucky at my senior year, but these guys are getting you for 4 years. Like it's pretty cool. So congrats on making that happen.
Thank you. Yeah, and I say to the Jimmy and I say it all the time. We just wish we had someone that told us to do pull-ups. Our
Yeah.
wrestling careers would have been a little bit better if we just learned how to do pull-ups properly and did them on a regular basis.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Pat, so your first CrossFit workout, you had to carry your body weight around the track 4 times. And I heard you say that back then the supposed best CrossFit coaches in the world weren't really that good, right? Because there was a lot of people getting thrashed, come in, you'd have the possibility of doing a snatch or a clean on your first CrossFit workout. Do you think
Yeah.
there's something to be said about maybe throwing someone through the ringer? And obviously, like we know a little bit more now, so we don't want people to get hurt. But is there something missing from just kind of initiation by fire?
Um, you mean as the athlete or as the coach?
As the athlete, like obviously we know more as
Yeah.
coaches, so that stuff doesn't happen. But like sometimes stuff gets slipped through the cracks, and someone does a workout that they might not be ready for, but they get through it and they don't get rhabdo and they're better for it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, we always talk about the mechanics consistency and then intensity, but as like the charter that you would use for moving people from, hey, they just started to doing stuff. But the intensity piece is very unique. Well, it's not as unique now, but it is one of the very few things that made CrossFit in the original days. There are very few programs that use true intensity as a result of high-powered movements being done fast. And that makes you feel miserable, as you know, but you survive, right? And like there's this psychological barrier that you push through, like I'm dying right now, but I'm gonna get through this. And on the other side of it, you're like, whoa, that was insane. I want to do that again. And I think there is something to be said for coaches making sure that they do turn those thumb screws for the athletes that walk in their door, even the new ones, like the mechanics consistency intensity, that ramp up to intensity should be faster based off of the individual you have in front of you. I think what that fails to do to some degree is it doesn't make it so everybody continues to do this program, because there's a lot of people who feel that the first time and they're like, I'm out. Whereas if you would have given them a little less initially and then you built them up to it, they'd be like, okay, I'm in, because like you didn't make me vomit on session one. But I think there was a certain type of psychology, probably you two and myself, but all fall into it, where when we got faced with that kind of a challenge, and maybe we vomited afterwards, we were like, oh, I'm coming back. I survived and I'm coming back, like, because that was gnarly. But you guys, like you said, you were both wrestlers. Like you were used to that kind of a thing. So I think making sure that when people like you two walk in my door, I dose you. And then when someone like my mom walks in the door, I dose you in a different way. And I think that that's where the subtlety has improved in the overall CrossFit space is like, I do think there's something missing when you like say you two walked in the door and I gave you like some little like floofy, yeah, we're gonna do a couple air squats and like a little jog. How does that feel? Okay, like just I want you to stay safe. It's like I want to take you two in and be like, yeah, you're pretty good. Let me thrash you, and I would toss you. And I think that that's where the individual nature of a good coach will be able to apply it to the people who are in front of them. And yes, I do think some of that is missing from a little bit of the community because it's easier to err on the side of too safe, because then you have more people coming to your gym, than err on the side of too brutal, which we tend to see a lot these days.
Pat, you know the Airey Bros all too well. One thing we love being dosed.
Fair, fair.
um, so Pat, we know you on the seminar staff. You're a flow master, but you also have some stuff going on with your wife Taz, warm up workout. And again, I heard you talking about how Taz is really good at the workout design and the lesson plan of it, where you prefer to kind of have the lesson plan and the workout and just be a coach, and you're really good at that aspect of it. And I feel like that a lot too, where I thrive in the connection with the people and that sort of thing. And the one thing I heard you say, you mentioned the acronym Ford.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit with us?
Yeah, for sure. That was actually something I brought into the CrossFit community. I listen to a lot of podcasts. Well, I used to. I don't anymore, but I used to drive like sometimes 4 hours a day, and I would just plug through podcasts. And I loved them. And I still read a lot of books or listen to a lot of books, but these days podcasts I don't listen to as many, just because I kind of burnt myself out on them for like 45 years. But in that time, I found there was a period of time where I was trying to figure out that like X factor that some coaches have. And because there's some coaches that when they coach, you want to listen and like you're like, that person's a good coach, like, and it, but you can't quite put your finger on it because there's other people who have all of most of the characteristics, like they know the movements, they see fault well, they correct fault decently, like they do all these stuff, but something in the way they deal with people just feels a little off. And you're like, I don't understand this. And there's a podcast I listened to that was it was on a doctor who was on basically the autism spectrum, and her form of autism made it so she lacked any emotional intelligence. So like she was so far in one degree, like she couldn't see the subtlety of human emotion. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of it called emotional intelligence or EQ or emotional quotient is what it was. But uh, it perfectly summed up some of the coaches that I'd seen who like they said all the right stuff, but how they said it and how like they couldn't feel the room at all, and they were missing that X factor. And it caused me to be like, we're all on that spectrum to some degree of like more emotional intelligence or less emotional intelligence. But how do we improve our emotional intelligence? Like, how do we start to get better at seeing the subtlety of human emotion? And so I started doing research in that space, and it took me to I forget even where the website was, but it basically was saying that the first step is like recognizing that there is such a thing as like subtlety, and you might not be seeing everything you need to see there. So like knowing that there's something beyond what you're currently seeing, and paying attention to it would be a good call. And then the other is trying to force interpersonal relation via this Ford method of communication. And the Ford method of communication was family orientation, recreation, and dreams, FORD. And it was just a way that people who don't naturally engage, like Rich, you probably have an easy time just walking up to somebody and talking to them, like something about their clothing. You'll say, "Oh, I love the Santa Cruz brand you have on your shirt, and let me chat about it." And like it happens naturally. Whereas someone who's less capable will walk up and be like, "I don't know what to say." And so this Ford method gave it like talk about these things and relatively in this order because it helps build trust. So you talk about their family because most people have family. Oh, you have brother, you have sister. Like, let me get into this. Occupation was, what do you do for work? Oh, cool. I love that kind of thing. How do you ever find that it's difficult in such and such area? Recreation, it's like, what do you do outside the gym? What do you do outside work? And then you can kind of connect with them on those levels. And then dreams was like, what are your aspirations? If you can get them to express those aspirations, you've connected with them on a level that most people, and you support that, then you connected with them on a level that most people don't. So I heard that and saw that and was like, that's rad. And so I brought that into our community and was like, look, if you're a coach who lacks the ability to connect, use this as a quick little tool for starting to be able to connect with people. So if you're not giving them a cue that's directly specific to the movement that they're doing, but you do need to communicate with them to build that rapport, use this as a method. And that was forward, and that was how I brought it in.
Yeah, that was genius. I love that. I put that in my toolbox because especially with the kids, you're just trying to make connections with them. You know, how was
Yeah.
your day? What'd you do over the weekend? You can't say you slept because everyone does that. That's just something we have to do as humans. Like, what
Yeah.
movie did you see?
Yeah.
All that stuff. And yeah, I love the personal connection with it. And um, the other thing, you talked about was like this new kind of third party programming that's going on more and more. You're seeing more and more of it, and
Yeah.
getting the coaches to buy into it because I think we've all seen it. I know Jimmy's experience where you mentioned it, like member comes up to you and you're like, why are we doing this? And I've heard it. I probably even said it too, and you're like, I don't know. Like I'm really confused about it too. And so that's where I wanted to get more into sort of the lesson planning of it because, coaching at a gym, a lot of times you don't have coaches meetings or you miss a coaches meeting, or it's just like a text message or an email that goes out, but this is the workout of the day. Sometimes you just see it posted on the gym daily and you've got to kind of come up with your own thing, which in a way sometimes that's great, but then in other times it's like, well, there's 5 people in this class of 20 that need scales and there's no options or anything like that. So with the warm-up workout, what does the lesson planning portion of that look like?
Yeah. So with warm workout, so the reason we started it was because my wife is really good at structuring stuff out. And like you said, I'm really good at like coming in and not knowing what to do, but knowing how to implement it. So she was like, here's what you do. And I would go in and implement it. I'd be like, here's how I'm going to do it. And I deliver that. And I found my coaching improve a lot from that. So we started doing that for all the coaches we had at our facilities. Then we did that across like multiple gyms within our single organization we were working for. And then I was like, more gyms need this because you're brilliant at it, honey. And she's like, great. So we launched Warm Up Workout, and that's how that all started. But generally in a lesson plan, just like a teaching lesson plan, you're going to have a brief to some degree that says like, here's the intended stimulus for the day. Here's how the different scales should go relatively. You'll have multiple different versions of the workout, and you can kind of flutter in between those depending on the athletes you have in front of you. And then you'll have a generalized warm up, a skill specific warm up, a workout, and then a cool down. And then you'll have time frames for all of those chunked out in a class. So it gives you the raw structure and the bones to be like, okay, this is what my hour looks like. Now I need to go in and execute. Of course, there's going to be individual things that get missed on those days where like all of a sudden you show up, you got 40 people in your class and you're like, that workout's not going to work. And you're going to have to figure out how to layer on, 2 separate heats or 3 separate heats or whatever it is. But that general structure allowed you to have something to work from. So my wife basically was really good at planning out like 2 months ahead of time. She would do all the programming, she would write all the sessions, and she would make sure that they worked really harmoniously within that month of getting variance across all the athletes that would come at the different class times and all the different, days of the week and everything. So that way there was a good experience that was relatively templated from class to class. And then it was up to the coach to bring their own personality and really step in there and just deliver, their own version of their interpretation of what was written down. And it was never meant to be like now you don't have to coach. It was more like, no. This is going to give you what like general structure, and then you got to get in there and make that work for the people who are with you. But yeah, that's what we did from 2015 to 2000, just this year. So we just stopped working. We just stopped doing warm up and workout. January 1st was our last day. We sold it to RPM Training in 2021, 22. And we're working with them for a while on another big project, and they kind of let it fall to the wayside. And then they had funding fall through, so they couldn't afford our salaries, and so we kind of had lack of control over what was going on. And I'm doing so much work with coaching development and best hour that I was like, I got to step away from all this. But now my wife gets to free up some mental space, which is cool. She gets to be a stay-at-home mom and free up a bunch of mental space, and it's good. We're lucky.
All right.
So, Pat, we interview a lot of Division I college wrestling coaches, and kind of the theme across the board is there's way more to being a head coach than the X's of O's of high crotches and singles and moves on the wrestling mat. And as we talk to you and you talk to us about Ford and kind of what you guys were doing there, there's way more to being a CrossFit coach and being a really good CrossFit coach than the actual thrusters and pull-ups. And you just brought up working with best hour of their day and the knowledge. So I'm curious if that's what you guys do there with the Knowledge Pro. You give coaches more options to be a better coach.
Yeah, I mean, exactly that. I think that, one of the best ways we learn is via example, right? So we get someone who shows us how it's done, and we watch that and we go, okay, I'm going to try to emulate that to some degree. And there's been very little of that within the larger CrossFit space, which is strange to me because we're so video capable, and the organization is so like media savvy. There's been very little examples of like what it means to be great. So you get a lot of different interpretations of what coaching is inside facilities, because it wasn't a franchise, right? So there's a lot of interpersonal relationships that matter. There's even basic structure that can set you up for success or failure. And the way I've always viewed coaching is like, if we look at the theoretical hierarchy of the development of a coach, and the different layers kind of build off of each other, the very foundation of it is what you know, the knowledge, so to speak. And what you know allows you to have a lens for everything else that you do. So every decision that you make, every cue that you give, every situation that you're in is going to be dependent upon the structure of what you know, what your overall education. You can actually, in my mind, you can know very little and be very effective because it doesn't require very much to be effective with most people. But the broader that educational standard is, or that the educational layer is, then the more types of people you can be more effective with quicker, is kind of how I view it. But the knowledge is just our attempt at getting more coaching specific content that is versions of like us actually doing it out there into the world. And it's a daily follow along video where you just log in, it goes to the app, you watch it. It's anywhere from a theory piece to a practical piece to my favorite cue to this is a person coaching and me like narrating over it and being like, okay, what do you see here? How do you do this? Here's how you could do it a little bit better. And it's just everything coaching wise and example wise that I wish I would have had as a coach coming up, that I had to learn by traveling to seminar to seminar to seminar to seminar, and failing over and over and over again, and slowly refining it, which you still have to do. Like, regardless of whether you have all my stuff, you still have to fail. You still have to try the stuff in your own language and see if it works, and it goes from there. But the knowledge was about building an educational platform that was very passive, that you can just access and be like, how do the best in the world do this? Okay, this is what it looks like. All right, awesome. And every day you're just kind of getting drip fed that information. The Knowledge Pro is a little bit more hands-on. We just launched that about the beginning of this month. And that is more, we're having conversations. You take the passive education that you get in the knowledge, and we have conversations about, okay, what do you think about the 9 foundational movements? How does that, relay in the gym? Here's some homework on some tests you can do with some self-evaluations, and kind of go into it. So it's a little bit more in-depth version of that. So it's like hands-on coaching development versus passive coaching development, but all in the same vision.
And you bring up the more knowledge you have, the wider your lens is. And it's funny because the older I get, the more I just love being that old man. Like, oh, it's so cool being old because I have all this wisdom from being a dumb kid, and now I have all this wisdom. You just put out a video, and I'm sorry if I butchered the name, but it was like the old me versus the me now, and it was pretty much like you were doing a workout that you crushed like 10 years ago, but you're not you from 10 years ago, so you kind of have to game plan it a little bit differently and let go of that expectation from 10 years ago. And I think that's important for, especially for someone like me, right? I don't have that same go that I did 10 years ago. I was in a different physical capacity 10 years ago. And I think that's something to teach and wisdom to kind of give to the younger crew or guys getting older, right? Because we see guys that we came up with that are in the same boat, but they might have not hit that roadblock. And I'm just kind of
Right.
curious how you can kind of, is there a way to coach that, or is that just something like someone's got to thrash themselves to realize that?
Well, I mean, as you guys probably both know, there's physiological barriers that prevent you from doing certain things. And I think in the type of training that we do, if you still do Olympic lifting and work like that and high intensity work, you're going to hit those physiological barriers in a way that you weren't expecting as you age. And if that doesn't cause you to break, it should cause you to be like, huh, I have to accept this. I have to accept it to some degree that I'm not just constantly ramping up. It's not constantly going to keep going up. There's going to be a point in time where it kind of levels off and not any given day might be a little not as good as it was before. So I think by nature in the training style that we use, you're forced to see that a little bit more aggressively. I think that's beautiful. I think there are certain people who stop doing stuff and then think they can go back into it, and you're like, that's where they like you see like an acute injury or something where they're like, yeah, I can step back on the football field. Here we go, and you're like, oh, Thanksgiving football wasn't what you expected, was it, there, Gramps? Um, so I do feel like to some degree you have to hit that wall. You have to experience it and you have to let go of that. But ideally, as we age, we're shifting perspective into what we value and what we find important. And for me, growing up, like physical dominance was important. Like it was important to me to like get out there and really be physically dominant over the people I was around because I had that capacity and I wanted to fulfill that outcome. And as I age, that's not important to me. And I don't know if it's because I'm not able to necessarily do it that it's not important to me, or I've been there and done that, so I'm like, meh. Like I'm now more interested in how effectively I can raise my kids or how deeply I can love my wife. And I don't know if that was which caused which or why it went that way. But yeah, I think clinging on to the past is is never been a good thing. I don't think there's many people who deeply cling on to the past and can't let it go, who are like, yeah, I'm really okay. Like it's more often than not, they're like, hey, you gotta pass it forward and bring it to the next generation, whatever it is, rather than clinging. You don't want to end up like what's Uncle Rico from
Bill of
Napoleon
State.
Dynamite. Yeah, I could have thrown this over the mountain right there. Like, yeah, that's not what we want.
Yeah. There are people like that though. Unfortunately, they're still reliving their high school football days or wrestling or whatever sport it might be. And sometimes you notice it. We live in out of state now, and so sometimes not as much anymore. But maybe you go back to a wrestling match or something, and you're like, "Oh, you're still talking about that?" I've lived
Yeah,
like three
yeah.
lives since then.
Yeah. Well, what's fascinating to me is I see like a lot of parents like that who
Mm.
then try to live it through their kids and then just make their kids have a miserable time. And they're sitting on the sidelines just like saying stuff that I'm like, dude, shut up. You are annoying. Are you the coach? No? Okay, shut up. It's and then it just puts this undue pressure and this weird relationship between the kid and the adult. I don't know. I'm not a fan. And I don't know if I can say that I'm quite privileged in the sense that I went there and I did that. Like I competed with the best in the world. Like I won a workout at the CrossFit Games, beat everybody. Like there's not many people who've been where I've been. So I don't know if I'm speaking from a place of like I got to live it, so now I can just let it go. And a lot of people never got to live it. It was always like they were never quite there. And so I don't know, maybe I'm speaking from a place of privilege, but it's one of the most annoying things for me when I see a parent trying to live through their child.
Yeah. And you see that sometimes too in the high school coaching ranks where, the coaches, the wins and losses are about their resume and not necessarily about the
Yeah,
kids, and they lay into the kids in front of people, and it's like, man, what are you doing? That kid's never gonna forget that instance or whatever. And I had
yeah,
a kid that, had a tough match last year, and he should have won and he lost. And, he was out with his brother, and I went out and talked to him for a while, and the brother was just like, man, I wish you were my coach when I was in high school. He's like, I've never heard a coach talk to a kid like that. He's like, that was amazing. I'm like, I've been yelling at him for making a stupid mistake or overlooking an opponent. It's not going to change the fact that he still lost. He's got another tournament next week. We can make adjustments, and then we'll go win that one. And that's what he did. But like
totally.
yelling at him is not going to make him. It's not going to motivate him. He needs
Yeah,
someone to be there
yeah.
to like tell him it's all right, and let's not do that next week.
Yeah, and like here's what we're gonna do differently. Like that's what a coach is. Like, but like I don't know, letting emotion get into it is an interesting one, because I think that that's where we start to lose control. I think you can have emotions about it, but that's what makes an adult, is that we don't need to respond directly to our emotions, and we can be like, I got these in check. Here we go.
Yeah.
Um, and we give that example to kids. I don't know. It's a hard one.
Are your kids old enough to be in any organized sports yet?
Yeah, I have a 11-year-old, 8-year-old, 5-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And so my 11-year-old, actually my 11, 8, and 5-year-old are all in sport. So they swim and they play soccer and they do a little horse riding, but they don't really compete in that. It's more just like a thing. But like they do those three things, and it's so fun, you know, so fun. Like I love watching them, and I definitely I know what those parents are feeling that want to talk, but I stay like dead quiet, and I watch, and like uh and then after the game, I'll be like, hey, next time that kid comes down the line, you need to shove his ass. Like you just push him over, man. It's like, you're not allowed to push. Oh, you push him though. You push him the second he comes on, like but it's so fun, man. I love watching him in organized sport, and it's really fascinating to watch how the three different ones relate to sport and what they're bringing to the table. My oldest is very capable and very good, but does not care at all. Like he's just out there and he's like just having fun. And what I love is when someone like pisses him off, he then just digs in and he just plays a million times harder. And I'm like, that's so great. Just play like that all the time instead. And then my 8-year-old is like physically very gifted, and he doesn't connect with the world super well, like auditorially, and like he doesn't speak as clearly as his brother or read super well. But when he gets on like the sporting field, the kid's dominant. Like he's scoring 8 goals a game, he's playing goalie, he's like doing all this stuff. He actually went and played it with my older son because they were missing players, and he just stepped onto the 11, 12, 13-year-old field and was great. And he's just like, like, and it's just it's so fun to watch. And then and then my goober little 5-year-old is just a ball of energy and questions and everything. But he steps on the field and he's kind of like timid, and he kicks the ball and it comes near him and he likes it. And his favorite thing is snacks after the game. Um, but I love it. Like I like this is immediately after saying, it bothers me when I see parents trying to live through their kids. I think it's different to just loving them experiencing these things. Like that's what I'm enjoying watching them experience it is like what makes me happy as a father. It's what makes me love having kids. But I don't try to be there with them. Like that's their thing. They get to do that. And that's where I'm kind of splitting the hairs and differentiating with that.
Do they all get along?
I mean, as good as four brothers can, like it's a lot of testosterone in a house. There's plenty of fights and battles and stealing, but like for the most part, they do all get along. They'll play for, we homeschool, so they're with each other all day, every day. And so they play really well 90% of the time. And they play a lot of games with each other, from Magic the Gathering and nerd games to adventuring in the woods and hunting for mushrooms to soccer to jumping on the trampoline and creating stuff and Calvin ball. And we have a big pool and they swim and we hot tub. And it's like, yeah, they get along better than most. But absolutely, they fight.
So you bring up foraging, and I saw that on your Instagram page. I'm curious, are there rules to that? Like, hey, we gotta like make sure we check it and match it up before we put it in your mouth, or don't put anything in your mouth till you go home. Like, I'm just curious how that works with the kids.
Yeah. So in Northern California, there's a couple, like I'm not a mushroom guy. Like I didn't grow up eating mushrooms. I didn't grow up searching for mushrooms. I grew up in like an urban kid, but we have this 5-acre homestead that I bought in 2019, and we started taking hikes in and around the property because we have, 20 acres of orchards behind us. We have 170 acres of vineyards up above. Then we have these giant redwood fields, and like they're just beautiful places to hike. And we're kind of in the middle of nowhere. And we started finding mushrooms. And my buddy came and visited, and he was like, "Oh, dude, you guys got some chanterelles here." And I was like, "What's a chanterelle?" He's like, "It's a
Oh,
really
they're
nice mushroom.
delicious.
We eat it. They're super delicious." And so we picked a chanterelle, and I was like, "This is cool." And then we went and bought this mushroom book. And so what we would do is we'd go on hikes and we would just pick all the mushrooms we could, everything we found, and bring it home. And then we would sit with the book with this big, thick manual and just I try to identify them. And then you do spore printing and you just learn them all. But in Northern California, there's a few mushrooms that are very identifiable, that are edible. And you've got chanterelles. Like it's almost impossible to misidentify a chanterelle. They're bright orange. They don't have gills, and they grow out of the ground. There's not really a poisonous lookalike. There's one that's kind of like it. It's called a jack-o'-lantern mushroom, but it grows off of dead trees. And it has gills, and when you see them next to each other, they look nothing alike. But if you were first time, you might want to like be cautious. Um, and then there's boletes, and boletes have a different type of instead of having gills, they have hollow pores that go all the way up, and they're porcinis. So you've got king, queen, prince, like all these different kind of porcinis that we find, and those are pretty much the only ones we eat: chanterelles and porcinis. But we have this like hotspot here of like mushrooms in my place. Like they're everywhere. Like and it's super fun to go out and try to identify them. We also do oysters. Oysters are really easy to tell too, because they just grow off wood and they're big and easy to find. But yeah, we pretty much only eat those, and we still go out and pick all the different ones, get the big like ones that look where the red ones with the Amanita
The Amanita
muscara or whatever.
mascara, yeah.
Yeah, it's super fun, and yeah, we were lucky. We're lucky to do it. I was actually sitting off my deck this morning, and I was like on a phone call, and I looked down, and I was like, that seems like a patch of chanterelles down there, and which we never have them like right by our house. And I was like, honey, I think, and she like walked down, and she came back with this just t-shirt full of chanterelles, like 4 pounds of chanterelles, and yeah, we're spoiled for our mushroom hunting.
Those are delicious.
They are.
We used to get we have a friend who's a cultivator in Denver, and he used to
Oh,
get
nice.
chanterelles shipped in from Oregon, and
Yeah.
we would buy them from him at the farmers market every Saturday. They're amazing.
They're amazing. And we get like literally I'll get probably 100 pounds of chanterelles a year. Like we get so many, and we're all private property. Like nobody can come in and forage our property. So like it's great. Like we're just in this little hot spot and very lucky.
And so I guess you said you found them yesterday, today. I guess they're year round then. because of the
No,
climate?
they're only in the winter season.
Okay.
They're only in the winter season. So there'll be the whole summer season where it's all dry, and then the first set of rains you get that's heavy enough. You'll see them about like 5 weeks after that. They'll start sprouting, and then there'll be multiple flushes throughout the winter season. And that's generally all our mushroom hunting time is winter.
Nice. You know what they
Yeah.
say, every mushroom's edible at least once.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Uh,
Rich, final floor.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, Pat, we have 4 questions we ask all our guests at the end of every podcast. First one I got for you is, are you a coffee drinker?
Absolutely.
How do you brew your coffee and how do you take it?
We have just a drip, but it's like a Breville drip, not a Breville. It's a gosh, what's it called? It's it's a very expensive drip coffee machine that does it at a very specific temperature, and it's great. But I just flick a switch and it goes. I will drink the occasional espresso. I have a Rancilio Silvia V1 sitting right there. But I tend to just drink the drip coffee. And I will either have a little bit of cream in it or I'll drink it black. Those are my two options.
Do you have a favorite roaster in Santa Cruz, or do you have a favorite
Absolutely.
roaster within the CrossFit community?
In Santa Cruz. My well, and they're both in the same. My buddy Jared Truby owns a company called Cat and Cloud. And Cat and Cloud is like really way up there in terms of their quality of coffee. They have one of the top rated coffee podcasts in the world, and they also are just really good roasters and tasters, and they've got quite a vibe. But they Jared does CrossFit and has been doing CrossFit for a while now, and is a good freaking dude and runs an amazing roastery.
Light roast, dark roast, espresso. What are you rocking?
All of it,
All of
all
it?
of it, all of it. I'm not too picky. I can drink and thoroughly enjoy gas station coffee. I'm not too fancy with it. Like I'm all about it. Go to a diner and just sit there and chug back like 2 pots. I'm in. I'm not picky, but I do love Jared as my he's my go-to.
That's that Flowmaster mentality. So you're not traveling with a French press or an AeroPress with your
No,
favorite beans?
no. I do work with a guy who's like that though, and he's one of the funniest dudes in the world. Like he's his whole character is like one of those guys, like who is just so into coffee. And whenever we go to a place, he'll research all the like coffee shops in the area. He'll drive like an hour in the morning to go get proper coffee. If like when we went to the games, we were like, hey, where's the nearest? Like we were asking him what's the best coffee shop in the area, and he gave us the name of the place, and it was an hour away, and he had gone there multiple times throughout this time, and I was like, what the hell, like you literally were driving an hour to have the coffee, and like that's how much he cares about it. But he's a lovely man, but he definitely is into his coffee. I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go out of my way a little bit, but an hour is
No,
a
no.
little extreme.
It was pretty funny. It was super funny.
That's awesome. Pat, do you have any daily practices or rituals that you do on a regular basis to show up as the strongest version of Pat Barber? And if it's not CrossFit, do you have another favorite way to sweat?
CrossFit is 100% my favorite way to sweat. If I'm working out, if I'm looking to just sweat, I really enjoy playing volleyball because games are fun for me. In terms of morning routines, like I'm very fortunate to be able to have a job where I work from home, and I am able to have breakfast with my family. And I also do a pretty good job of almost every morning. Me and my family all go out and we do like a morning hot tub, rain or shine. It's great. We got all 4 kids in there, and then we'll usually jump in the pool, which is freezing. So it's kind of a little hot cold sort of deal. Um, but yeah, other than that, not too many daily routines. I try to journal as much as I can. I think uh, that routine or that the act of journaling, I think, is one of the most profound things for psychological development. And I've only found that in the last like 3 years, and it's been really, really amazing for me. But yeah, I try to do that as well.
Is that like a free flow practice where you're just kind of writing your thoughts?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I'll sit down and just pull up my journal and just write about what comes. Sometimes it's really short, it's like a couple words. Sometimes it's like really lengthy. Sometimes I'll just be sitting there and have a thought, and I got to run over my journal and write it down. And it's everything from ideas to coaching stuff to life stuff to how I'm feeling. Like, what I find really amazing about it is like when I want to do something different, like, hey, I want to eat a different way, or I want to do something like this, I'll write down the things I want to do differently, and I'll think I'm not making progress. And then I'll read old journals and be like, whoa, I've inherited like 5 of these traits that I wasn't, I mean, I wrote it down and I tried to do it, but I didn't think I'd come so far. And it really shows kind of where you're at. And also like, oh, I haven't done these before. let's dive into these. So it gives like such a record of that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
I, I definitely feel you on the journaling, and it's funny you bring it up because I've been getting back into pen and paper for a while. Was just keeping a note, and but there's something with the pen and paper, and I
So good.
was listening to Rick Rubin and Huberman talk about it, and they were talking about being honest in your journal and lying to yourself in your journal. It was like cheating at solitaire, and it just
Yeah, that's a funny way of putting it. I like that phrasing. Lying in your journal is like cheating at solitaire. Oh, shucks.
yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that if I could, I mean, I know you don't do an advice thing here, but if I could give any advice, it's like don't lie. That is the fundamental thing that I think breaks down the fabric of who you are. And like even untruths, like even things like little things, I don't know. I'm just a fan of just radical own your shit and don't lie. If you're gonna be a turd, but own it, like I don't know. I think that's one of been the most profound things that I've changed in my life is not that I was a big liar, but I would I would subtly omit certain facts, which led to a underlying sense of distrust with myself. But these days, not so much, and I'm happier than I've ever been.
Nice. Yeah, I heard you say something else that was pretty profound for me this morning. You said, don't be confrontational, but don't be afraid of confrontation.
Yeah,
You
for
know, in terms
sure.
of communicating, I think you were talking about relationships specifically, but I think that's just sometimes, we even avoid confrontation because we don't want to be confrontational, but sometimes you just have to be direct and communicate those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I wholeheartedly stand behind that. I've actually had to learn to be less confrontational, and read the room a bit better to figure out a way that I can like, okay, maybe this needs to be said in a different way. And that's something I've had to learn in my life. But I see a lot of people who are unwilling to present their actual belief structure. And I'm like, I would question that. I think you should be willing to be like, I disagree, like like, and if you have the confidence to do so, that I think that does wonders for the world in my mind.
Yeah, I definitely agree and appreciate you sharing that with us. The next question I have for you, what are you listening to right now? Music, podcasts, audiobooks? Are you reading anything?
Yeah, I'm reading like 4 books right now, slowly making it through, and then I'm listening to 2 others. My books that I'm reading, I've got a fantasy book called Murtag, which is part of this like youth fantasy of it's called the Aragon series, but it's this newest one that just came out after being not written a book for 10 years from my childhood. So I'm reading that. And I'm also reading a book called What's Really Wrong with You. And it's a fascinating little journey. This did you guys ever read there's a book by a guy he was the first American student of Royce Gracie, the first jujitsu, worth defending. Have you read that book?
No.
No.
It's pretty rad. So he's an ex-drug addict, like kind of guy was just not going through life very well. And he met Royce Gracie when Royce Gracie was working out of his garage and became the first like American student of Royce Gracie and is now, and like it's his whole story of how jujitsu became what it is in the US. And it's a fascinating book. But in that book, he talks about hurting his back like way later in the book, and nothing was making it better. And he found this massage practice that was super unique that made it better. And he really quickly mentions the practitioner who created it, called Thomas Greiner. And I looked up that guy's book and I found it. It's from 1986, I want to say 1984 or something like that. And it was he wrote this in 1984, and it's just a fascinating snapshot of what he thought was wrong with everybody. And it goes down to talking about muscle spasm being like the root cause of many of modern illnesses, in a very similar way that we talk about food and diet being a big thing that causes many of modern illnesses. But it's all like he's too one dimensional in his thinking, but there's a lot of really cool information, and I love how he's phrasing it. So I disagree with a lot of what he says, but I'm working my way through reading that. So that's one of the two things I'm reading. The things I'm listening to, a ton of music right now. The new Mumford and Sons track just dropped. I was into that. I fall into YouTube music holes all the time where I'm just listening to more and more acoustic covers of stuff, and then go into metal covers of things and everything in between. And then audiobook wise, I'm listening to the Witcher series, which is that Netflix series, but they made books out of it, which was originally a video game. Fascinating, fun little book, fantasy book, and then another parenting book that I'm also listening to. So yeah, a little bit of everything.
Pat, I also heard you say you recommend the Harry Potter series to everyone, so I've never been into it, but I respect you a lot, so I may dive into that.
That, I mean, honestly, it's good. And I mean, there's a reason it was the phenomenon that it was. And the if you're gonna get into fantasy and you want something more adult, not like nude and stuff like that, but just like that tickles the brain quite a bit harder. I have some other recommendations, but Harry Potter is very core to uh, the fantasy world, and she did a fantastic job of developing her writing as the books went along, and it's just a good story. Also, if you're not a reader, listening to it, the guy who narrates it, Jim Dale, world class, 10 out of 10 recommend.
All right, you might have sold me on it. I've never thought about digging into the Hogwarts and whatnot, but
they
I
they they
might.
get they get they get darker and darker and more fun to listen to as the books go on. So I think I if you can make it through the first few books and just enjoy a fun little fantasy series, it's good.
Okay, all right. You heard it here first, folks. Maybe second. He mentioned on another podcast. Pat, last one we got for you. Do you have any guilty pleasures or vices? Could be food. Do you like craft beer? Are you a Swiftie?
Not a Swifty. I have not found that appeal. In terms of craft beer, I love craft beer. I think if I say, but I don't have it as a vice. I'm actually not drinking for this year. Um, I would say a guilty pleasure of mine is I almost eat a perfect bar every day. Perfect bar and milk is like milk and cookies for me, and I absolutely love it. And I will navigate the rest of my day around having one of those in the morning with like frozen. So frozen perfect food bar straight out of the freezer. I'm like breaking it off and then drinking the milk with it. It just tickles a place in me that nothing really else does. So I would say that's a guilty pleasure of mine.
Okay. Do
What's
you
your
have a,
go-to flavor? Sorry, Rich.
no, I was gonna say the
Peanut
same
butter,
thing.
baby.
Peanut butter, old
Peanut
school,
butter, like just classic
OG.
peanut butter. I mean, the other one that I loved was fruit and nut, but it no longer exists. They don't do fruit and nut anymore now. So I was deeply saddened by that.
Have you had the layered ones yet?
I have not. Have you?
Yeah, yeah. There's a fruit one, and I think there's a chocolate one that are
This
pretty good.
layered?
Yeah,
Huh. I'll check it out.
yeah.
I mean, the best place to get them is Costco. Costco sells them, and they're like $2 a bar, just under $2 a bar. Whereas if you go to the Whole Foods, it's like $4 a bar, and I'm like, nah,
Yeah.
dude. So I go to Costco, and they only have peanut butter and
Okay.
the peanut butter chocolate one, which my kids eat. So I'll get boxes
You doing raw milk with that?
if I can.
Yeah.
It's so expensive here. I really want to get a cow so I can have my own raw milk, but right now we just do like it's like a as close to raw as you can find in the store and not be like $27 a gallon. It's still like $11 a gallon. I mean, it's expensive ass milk, but it's not fully raw.
But you get a cow, you might have some other mushrooms growing out there with you.
I just may. Those are hard to identify. They call those LBMs, little brown mushrooms, man. There's such a wide variety of them. They're hard to find.
Yeah.
Pat, before we hop offline here, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about, or anything that we didn't ask you that you want to let the fans of Airey Bros Radio know?
No, man. Just like enjoy life, get out there, have fun. I don't have I'm so focused on trying to be the best version of myself as a father that I don't really have much for many others, but yeah.
Amen.
Sweet. Thanks, Pat. Really appreciate it, your time tonight and this conversation. And I know the fans of Airey Bros Radio are going to enjoy it just as much.